After graduating from the American Film Institute in the early 70s, Alan Holzman got a job as an editor for Roger Corman's New World Pictures. Once he edited Candy Striped Nurses and Crazy Mama, he was able to get Corman to look at a film he shot in the hopes of getting a job as a director. Corman watched the film, and Holzman was happy that he only fell asleep once. Holzman had a terrible stutter, and afterwards asked Corman if he could direct, but he had a hard time getting the question out. Corman politely said, "Thank you, Alan. I'll see you later," and left. Holzman was embarrassed, but not giving up. He continued editing, mostly action movies like Checkered Flag or Crash and Cloud Dancer. After trying to get his own film off the ground, he wasn't having any luck, so he contacted Corman again, who brought him in to edit his biggest film at the time, Battle Beyond the Stars. While editing Battle Beyond the Stars, he was looking at their front screen projection footage. This was a new method, and the footage he had was far too dark. Holzman called Corman to say they had to reshoot the scenes, and Corman said, "I never reshoot, make it work." Holzman was walking back across one of the stages and saw someone looking at some front screen slides that looked amazing. He called Corman back to tell him they needed to hire this guy. His work was outstanding. That guy was James Cameron. And if you want to hear more about that story, check out my video on the movie before this one, Galaxy of Terror. Corman had been very pleased with Holzman's work and asked if he'd be able to direct with his stutter. Holzman said, "I stutter less when I'm directing." Corman had luck with moving editors to directors in the past, with Joe Dante and Alan Arkish, so he decided to give Holzman the chance to prove himself. Corman told him he was going to put him through the Roger Corman School of Filmmaking. There were two movies that needed some second unit work, so Holzman shot some additional scenes for the Smokey and the Bandit ripoff, Smokey Bites the Dust, as well as some additional action for Firecracker in the Philippines. Meanwhile, Aaron Lipstadt and various crew members were building a set for Galaxy of Terror based on James Cameron's designs. Corman went to the set to see what was going on, and they told him they were going to shoot on the set Wednesday through Friday, and then they'd dismantle or strike the set over the weekend. Corman paused and looked at the set. He was impressed with how good it looked, and since these things weren't cheap, he wanted to get more out of it. He told them not to strike the set this weekend. He may have something to do with it. He contacted Holzman and told him he was impressed with his directing work and had an opportunity for him. It was Tuesday, and there would be a space set available this weekend. He said, "If you can write, direct, and produce a 7 to 8 minute opening to a space movie and shoot it in one day, I'll give you a whole movie." He offered him two actors, a lead, Jesse Vint, and Don Oliveira, who had a robot costume. He also said, "If you need inspiration, I've always wanted to do Lawrence of Arabia in space." Holzman said David Lean, director of Lawrence of Arabia, was his favorite director. So Corman responded, "You should have no problem at all then." Corman told Vint that he would film that weekend, and then in a few months he'd call him back for the rest of the movie. He shot an opening with Jesse Vint waking up from a cryogenic sleep to find his robot alerting him that they're under attack, which would lead into a full feature. Since he didn't have time for visual effects, he reused some spaceship footage from Battle Beyond the Stars. Corman liked what he saw, so he agreed to give Holzman his first chance to direct a full feature. Holzman started working on a script and pitched a few ideas based on the concept of Lawrence of Arabia in space. Corman said they were all too expensive, and after a while told him, "Just rip off Alien." They hired Jim Wynorski to put together a treatment, which he based on Corman's Attack of the Crab Monsters. Attack of the Crab Monsters was a ripoff of The Thing from Another World from 1951. Corman was happy with this, and then brought in Tim Kiernan, who was fresh out of NYU to write the screenplay. The title they chose for the movie was Mutant. It was about a Space Federation marshal who lands on a planet where a genetic experiment gets loose and starts killing all the people at the station. They brought in the Skotek brothers, Robert and Dennis, to help design the mutant. The brothers had previously worked with James Cameron on Battle Beyond the Stars and Galaxy of Terror. The Skotek brothers originally were just building the miniatures, but as is what often happens in a Corman production, you take on all sorts of jobs, and they started working on the full-size Stage 4 creature. The mutant would have 4 stages, each one bigger than the last, much like Alien. They were able to reuse the giant maggot from Galaxy of Terror by stripping it down to the skeleton and then building the new monster on top of it. Holzman wanted his girlfriend, Susan Justin, to do the score for the movie. She was a classically trained pianist who had a new wave rock band, and he knew her music would fit in. She even went to UCLA with James Horner, who had just done the score for Battle Beyond the Stars. He was originally set to do the score for this, but Holzman was able to talk them out of it. When the director was looking at the script, he really wanted the movie to be more of a horror comedy rather than just horror. He loved An American Werewolf in London and wanted his movie to have a little of that flavor. However, he knew Roger Corman hated horror comedies. Back when Holzman was editing Crazy Mama, Paul Bartel was working on Death Race 2000. The movie had a heavy satirical slant, and Corman hated it. He just didn't understand what Bartel was doing. Corman openly stated he doesn't like mixing comedy with any genre. Holzman still wanted to sneak the comedy in, so he went about it very carefully. When casting, they already had Jesse Vint and Don Oliveira, who also helped with some of the effects work. They hired English actress June Chadwick to play Dr. Glasser. When she auditioned, she was an immediate yes. They had an actress lined up to play Tracy Baxter, but 2 days before filming was set to start, she dropped out. The actress just did a McDonald's commercial, and her boyfriend convinced her that meant she was on her way to the big time. There was no way she was going to get naked for some Corman film, which would only serve to hurt her career now. They had an emergency casting call, and no one was right. The only one who was close was an older Playboy bunny. Holzman didn't want her, but Corman said, "Sorry, you're stuck with her. We have to shoot tomorrow." The two were arguing when in walked actress Dawn Dunlap. She was the right age, was very pretty, and was a former model, so she had no problem with the nudity the movie required. She was perfect. While working on the film, Holzman noted that there would be a lot of nudity. He asked Corman what to do if an actress refused to do a nude scene. Corman said, "Go to Hollywood Boulevard and get the ugliest prostitute you can find. Offer her $10 to come back to the studio, and tell the actress that this is your body double. The actress will insist on doing the nudity because they don't want the audience to think they look like that." Since the budget was small, they had less time, less sets, less crew, and less money. They had a 4-week shooting schedule, which was very short. Since the film was the lowest budgeted one of the past 2 space movies, much of the film was recycled from other Corman productions. As per usual with Corman, the materials used in the set were whatever they could scrounge together. The walls famously were covered in styrofoam containers from McDonald's, and the ceilings in some of the walls were cut up milk crates. The spacesuits were borrowed from another production. The breathers were just painter's masks, and the goggles were just that, goggles they bought at the store. The sheaths were scarves. To get some unique shots, they built a dolly track on top of the sets, so they could film the actors going down the halls. They needed a makeup effects expert, so they brought in John Carl Buechler. Corman wanted him because he knew the movie would need more gore. There was a bit of a problem. He only had 3 weeks to design what they needed, but the final script had yet to be approved. So his designs needed to be adaptable in case something changed between now and then. He needed a skeleton, so Buechler contacted his friend Bob Burns, who worked on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He borrowed a skeleton from him that he was able to cast a mold from, which they could use for multiple purposes. The main thing was that they needed to mold and sculpt a generic human, so they could cut off limbs as they needed. They had the main skeleton as the character who was slowly being melted away. Most of the filming was done in the Corman Studios in Los Angeles, California. The scene of the crew leaving the facility was filmed in the parking lot at the studio. They just threw some rocks and dirt to make it look like the alien planet. This led to the only exterior shoot, which was filmed at Vasquez Rocks, about an hour from the studio. The actors had small prop boxes on their shoulders with a thin plate of mylar in them that was supposed to be cameras. James Cameron expanded on this idea for the cameras the Marines used in Aliens. The day they did the Alien Planet shoot at Vasquez Rocks, they were all set to go until the costume designer arrived and announced she forgot the costumes. They then had to drive back to the studio to get the costumes, which was a huge loss of time, especially since they were only able to shoot out there for 1 day. While they were filming the mutant out in the Vasquez Rocks, there was another accident, and one of the squibs went off and ignited the prop. One of the effects guys popped up from behind the rocks to yell, "Keep rolling!" because he knew this thing was going to burn away to nothing. The director now had a problem. He had to figure out how to rework the scene to get them back to the base. He took a 20-minute break and decided they'd have the characters say it was a trick.
"It's empty. There's nothing in the damn thing."
And had them head back to the lab where they'd encounter the Stage 3 mutant. The slime in the film was methyl cellulose, which is a food thickening agent. It's also the stuff that was later used as the slime in Ghostbusters. One of the parts left over from the Lawrence of Arabia concept did make it into the film. There's a big X on the towel Tracy has, which stood for the planet Zarbia. The director wanted Dr. Glasser to die by having the mutant shove an appendage through her vagina. The actress refused to do the scene. She argued that as it was written, the spike was supposed to go through her midsection, not through her that way. The director insisted because he wanted this to be a sexual death. Holzman went to Corman to ask for a body double for the scene, but he refused because it wasn't in the budget. The actress brought her agent in and they argued for some time until she finally caved and did the scene. She was not happy and was angry with the director for the rest of the shoot. While working on the production, one of the crew asked Buechler, "Is this a sleazy ripoff of Alien?" Buechler, being proud of his work, said, "Yes, but it's the best sleazy ripoff of Alien ever made." Control was the same set as the lab, just with different lighting. For the animals in the lab, they couldn't afford to make all the animal props, so they had to figure something out. They found a service where they could rent 200 dead animals for $400 a day. They deliver them and even come back to pick them up. They needed 2 days for the shoot, and on the second day, under the hot lights of the production, the set smelled awful. The monitors weren't monitors at all. They projected 16mm footage onto some, and the others were just slides. While working on the script, they needed a way for the creature to die. Corman came up with the idea that they kill the beast by feeding it cancer. That way the monster could throw up as it rejects the cancer, and gives the audience a good gross-out finale. When Colby pulls the cancer out of the doctor, that was inspired by something the director saw while he was in the Philippines. While working on Firecracker, he witnessed something called psychic surgery, where a doctor went inside of a patient with his hands and pulled cancerous tumors off of his organs. They had that worked out, but now the problem was getting the proper alien vomit that looked good on film. They played with various substances and finally decided on polyurethane foam. This stuff solidified on contact with air and would give you a nasty chemical burn if it touches your skin. The creature was going to be puking this stuff all over, and they needed to protect the crew, so they built a wall of hefty garbage bags and cut holes to put the cameras through. The guys controlling the puppet weren't so lucky. Don Oliveira, the guy in the robot suit, and Mark Shostrom, the special effects makeup artist, were in there wearing rubber gloves and masks to pour the foam out of the creature's mouth and trying not to get any of it on them. To get the bizarre mutant noises, Karen Wilson, the sound designer, put the microphone down her throat and recorded the sounds. After filming, Holzman edited the production. He knew Corman would object to his edit if he heard people laughing, so when the film was screened, he asked those in attendance not to laugh. Corman saw his cut and loved it, especially the shower scene with Dawn and June. There was one thing he didn't like, though: the voice of the robot.
Sam, are you alright?
Alright, sir.
He said it was because he couldn't understand it, so he asked to have them get a new voice actor to redub the lines in. Holzman said it was just a bunch of technobabble that didn't mean anything, and he thought a more clear voice would only highlight how pointless the lines were. Still, it was a minor complaint, and he hired someone to redo the lines.
Sam, are you alright?
Alright, sir.
As a little tribute to Corman and his particular style, the director put Corman's producer's credit right after the gratuitous shot of June walking down the hall. They now planned on doing a public screening. It was scheduled to play after the movie Moving Violations. The audience was loving the film. They were laughing and screaming at all the right moments. Holzman was sure he had a hit. Just then, during one of the big laughs, Corman got up from his seat and stormed to the back of the theater. He was talking to Holzman when one audience member belly laughed at a scene. Corman smacked the guy in the face and said, "Stop laughing! This is a serious sci-fi movie!" The guy was not too happy with this and dumped his soda on the producer. After the movie, Corman told the director, "Alan, this was the worst sneak preview I've had in 23 years, but don't worry, I know how to save it." The director responded with, "Save it? It was great. The audience loved it." Corman couldn't understand how the audience could laugh at a movie like this. He saw no profit in making a horror comedy. It wasn't giving the audience what they expected from a Corman film. Corman told him to be in the editing suite tomorrow morning to make changes, or else he'd have someone else do it. The next day, Corman made him make 13 cuts, each one removing something that the audience laughed at. They screened it again at Hollywood, and then back to the editing room to make more cuts. There was a scene that got a laugh that Corman didn't cut. When Colby and Glasser are having sex, there's a guy with a yo-yo, which was moving faster and faster, as an obvious metaphor to what was going on. It got a big laugh, and the reason Corman didn't cut it was because of the nudity. This took the film down from 84 minutes to 77. Around this time, Corman also wasn't happy with the title. He said no one would know what a mutant was. He sent his assistant to a local high school to ask the kids if they would rather see a movie called Mutant or Forbidden World. When she returned, she said most of them voted for Forbidden World. The director pointed out there already was a Forbidden Planet, and Corman said, "That was 20 years ago, no one will remember." The poster they used was an unused one from Galaxy of Terror, with a bug monster over a girl, like the maggot over Taffy O'Connell. There is nothing like this in Forbidden World. The movie was now released as Forbidden World, and it did well. It made over $4 million, versus its well below $1 million budget. That was fine. This was a smaller film, and Corman wasn't expecting it to do better than something like Galaxy of Terror. The movie won Best Film and Best Visual Effects at a sci-fi film fest in France. The New York Post praised the score, calling it the first punk rock space opera. Jim Wynorski loved the score and pushed for a soundtrack release, which it got. This is one of the very rare cases in which a New World film got a soundtrack release. The director was sad because while it did well, it was no longer his vision. He felt the edits made the film mundane and removed much of the heart of the production. All the humor was gone, and now it played too serious, which only served to amplify how silly it was. He put the humor in there initially to let the audience know they were supposed to laugh. Now it looks like they're laughing at it instead of laughing with it. The director kept his original cut and wouldn't give it back to Corman. This went on for some time, until Corman finally threatened to have him arrested, and Holzman called him to make a deal. Instead of returning it, and having Corman most likely destroy it, he wanted to have it donated to UCLA. They both agreed, and the print was donated to UCLA, after the director made a copy, of course. The film did well, and even though there was some turbulence between the director and the producer, Corman still offered Holzman another sci-fi movie to direct. Holzman turned it down because he was upset at how his vision was compromised. He tried to make it on his own, and after a few years, that didn't work out, so he returned to Corman and directed the action drama Out of Control. Almost a decade later, Corman remade Forbidden World as Dead Space. They changed the character names and some other minor things, but overall, it's the same movie using the same storyline. Forbidden World is probably the least known of the Corman space trilogy, although some also like to add space raiders. How are they all connected? Well, while the stories are all different, they all share some of the same elements, like the sets, costumes, props, miniatures, and even the score. The movie's since been restored and put on Blu-ray thanks to Shout Factory. As an added bonus, they were able to include the director's cut from his own personal archive, the copy he made before passing the footage off to UCLA. It's the first time this cut of the film has been seen since 1982. I like Forbidden World, but it was really interesting to see Mutant after all these years. It was now easy to see how some of the laughs were intentional, things that still made it into the theatrical cut. Stuff like the alien climaxing for the first time while watching Tracy undress. In the theatrical version, I just thought it was an unintentionally funny moment, but it turns out it was totally intentional. There's plenty of other stuff too. Holzman went off to be a successful director and editor in his own right. He's moved on to directing documentaries, including Cut, an autobiographical documentary about his time in Hollywood. He's since won 2 Primetime Emmys, as well as other awards and nominations for his documentary work. His story should be an inspiration to others who want to get into the industry. Here's a guy who has an impairment, and yet he was still able to achieve his dreams and direct movies. Incredibly admirable. The Skotex said it was awesome working for Corman. Anything you had in your head, you could get on the screen, as long as you could convince Roger it was cool enough, as well as cost-effective. Forbidden World is much like John Carl Buechler said, the best sleazy ripoff of Alien ever made, which is even more interesting since the Skotek brothers took what they learned here and worked with James Cameron to make Aliens, which was the best sequel of Alien ever made.
Hey, easy. You want to know what I want to know? I like to know what you and Tracy were doing in there dressed like that.
Explaining your scars, no doubt.